Hello, classmates and Dr. S. This is Nicole Dalton, and this week in my Week 2 discussion board, I will be covering 4 ethics theories, providing 2 examples, and answering one question that was posed to the entire class. Our first theory is natural law, and this idea derived from the idea that God believed that morality was important for everyone to possess, and that being a good person was part of his plan for all human beings. Essentially, God built into our DNA to know the difference between right and wrong, and because it is built into our DNA, not everybody needs to know who God is in order to possess natural law. Sometimes natural law is violated for things like people's ignorance, not knowing exactly how to handle every situation, and emotions. Sometimes our emotions will get in the way of us making the right and wrong decision. Our next theorist is Immanuel Kant's categorical imperatives, and he disagreed with combining religion and morality. He said it shouldn't matter what religion you're in to be moral. And there's 2 factors that come into play with this theory. The hypothetical imperative, meaning that there's commands that you need to follow if you want to achieve something. So if you want money, you need to get a job. The other is categorical imperatives. And these are commands that you should follow regardless of your desires, and you should just know what is right and wrong based on your intellect. Our next theory is, in my opinion, the most strict theory of the ones that are being covered today, and this is utilitarianism. I say it's strict because you can never break a rule, and you always have to be aware of the fact that good consequences is going to lead to good actions and vice versa. An example of how somebody measures a good consequence is the happiness or pleasure that it brings to the group of people. And another thing that I found interesting was the principal utility, which is trying to make decisions that is going to make the biggest impact and create the most good for the biggest number of people. One of the downsides of this theory is that when you are trying to make decisions for the greater group or a number of people, sometimes that means that you have to put them before yourself, and that isn't necessarily going to impact your happiness directly. Our last theorist is Thomas Hobbes's contractarianism, and he believed that morality didn't come from God and it wasn't something that was naturally instilled in us. He believed that it was rational people that were signing up for contracts, and they needed to cooperate with those contracts in order to be good. And the interesting thing is that we can be signed up for contracts and not even ask for it, and this is called implicit contracts. And if you were to break the contract, whether it is implicit or something that you were chosen, like your job, for instance, this is called defection. And this means that you decided to look after your own interest instead of cooperating for the greater good of people. And one of the interesting things is that contracts can change. If the entire group decides that an aspect of the contract needs to be amended, then the group can decide that, and that would change. Examples that could be found in modern day public administration is one, utilitarianism and having to make a tough decision that's going to affect the greatest amount of good for a large amount of people. An example of this is a public agency having to make the tough decision of laying off employees in order to recuperate the city's revenues in order to best serve the community and not hurt the organization even further financially. The second is natural law. Most of the time when people are put in tough situations, they will pull from previous experiences, but sometimes that isn't always possible. So sometimes we have to make decisions based on our gut, and that would be an example of natural law. Something inside them is telling them what is right and what is wrong and having to deal with that particular situation. The virtue theory definitely applies to public administrators. As a public agency, it's our goal to serve the community to the best of our ability. And if we don't have staff that's working to be the best people that they can, that's ultimately going to affect the public that we serve negatively. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to any feedback that you may have for me.